Good morning and welcome to this AHDB BPOA webinar entitled Managing Bemisia in Poinsettia Crops. I'm Wayne Brough, AHDB Knowledge Exchange Manager. Before I introduce the presenters and their presentations, just a few housekeeping points, especially for those who are new to webinars. As you'll see from your screen in the top right hand corner, there's an icon with a microphone with a line through it, which indicates that you are muted. The audience will remain muted throughout the entire webinar, but you can still submit questions. Questions can be submitted throughout the entire webinar, and after each presentation, I shall verbally ask each presenter in turn the questions posed. But I'll come back to that at the next slide to give you more instructions. In terms of time, the webinar will run to about an hour or just a little bit more. Each presenter has between 15 and 20 minutes with 5 minutes questions. If you need to leave the webinar or if colleagues can't make it, the entire webinar will be recorded and will be available on an archive page on the HD website. I'll come back to that in a moment. And we have registered the webinar for both basis and Neroso points. And again, I'll come back onto that on the next slide as to how to obtain the sheets themselves. So as I mentioned before about questions, in the top right hand corner, you will probably either have one or two boxes. If you've got the small little grey box with the 4 icons, if you want to press on the red button with the white arrow, which is the top one there, that will then bring up the larger box, which can be seen on the screen now. If you then go down to the bottom where it says questions, click the white down arrow, it will expand the box and you'll be able to enter a question which you then submit for any of the presenters as you listen to all 3 in due course today. Within there as well, you will also find the handouts box, and again, there's a white drop-down arrow, a white arrow which you click to get the drop-down boxes from there. There'll be the basis and the Neroso sheets in there. If you click on either or both, download them, complete the information on the basis form, and then submit the form via email back to Maya. Maya's email address is actually contained within the basis and Neroso sheet. We will register on your behalf your attendance and the points allocation there. So during today, at some point during the webinar, if you could click and download the basis and Neroso sheets if you require the points. As I say, in terms of recording, the entire webinar will be recorded and made available next week on the HDB website. The address is given at the bottom of the slide there, and I shall reiterate that at the end of the webinar. In terms of the program, we've got 3 presenters today and 3 presentations. The first one by Derek is on Bemisia tabaci. It's covering the plant health status of the pest. The second is on the control of Bemisia in overseas poinsettia propagation from Richard. And the third is effective management of Bemisia using integrated pest management options in poinsettia from Neil. For those who don't know the presenters, I will go through a quick potted history of each just to give you some background before we commence the first presentation. So Derek, following stints in research and farming, Derek started his career in the Plant Health Service as a frontline inspector in the northwest of England before moving on to regional and national roles. As a principal plant health and seed inspector, he currently leads on designing and delivering plant health surveys and action on quarantine, pest and disease outbreaks in horticulture, agriculture and the wider environment. Richard has had a varied career working as inspector with the Ministry of Agriculture in the Netherlands and as a researcher. Most recently has worked with Intergreen, Beaconkamp and Coppert, and for the past 10 years Richard has been involved with poinsettia production, working in both plant breeding and production. For those who don't know Neil joined Fargrow as their IPM specialist in '95 after almost 20 years of entomology research at the Glasshouse Crops Research Institute at Littlehampton. Currently, Neil advises numerous horticultural growers about developing and maintaining IPM programs, including herb and salad crops, soft fruit production, protected ornamental plant production, and hardy nursery stock. So with that, if I can ask the presenters to mute their microphones and switch off their webcams, except for Derek. We shall commence, and we'll start with Derek McCann's presentation on Bemisia, plant health status of the pest. So I shall just pass over sharing to Derek now. So over to Derek, thank you.
Hopefully that's okay.
Yep, that looks fine.
Right. Good morning and welcome. And hopefully IT is working. I've moved on to the second slide now. I hope that's all working. This is really a follow-up to the presentation given in January, and so I'll try and capture some of the things there. Apologies if I go over some old ground. The first three slides are really stuff provided to me by DEFRA Policy and our consultants, so I'll do my best to relay those to you. And the last three slides are more to do with pesticide action and how we're going to go about dealing with any fines this year. So, policy. It is still government's intention to do a policy review this year. Unfortunately, COVID-19 has put a spanner in the works for several reasons. The government has DEFRA problems during the pandemic. They're restricted in what consultations are allowed to go out. Government likes to keep communication channels as free as possible. And so if another month or two, I think, before they're really in a position to think about progressing it forward to a consultation, this will mean that any decisions will take effect later this year or possibly even held over to next year. And the other complicating factor is if there's any change in legislation, there are issues regarding finding a suitable time slot in the legislative calendar, which is getting very congested at the moment for obvious reasons. So ahead of that, I have provided to AHDB and BPOA a DEFRA contact who will be ahead of the consultation, so you can start having a dialogue with DEFRA now, and that name has been provided. So that's the policy review. Now, I thought I'd tackle the issue whether Bemisia tabaci is endemic in the UK head on. First of all, let's decide what we mean by endemic. Are we talking about, is it prevalent within all glasshouses or glasshouses in the UK, or is it actually existing in the wider environment and there's a population out there in the wider environment? Our position is still that it's not possible for this pest to survive outside, based upon the biology and modelling. It's after all a species that is adapted to dry tropics, subtropic. We have provided to HDB links to at least three recent papers, 2019, 2020 papers by the Met Office and Breton Research Institutes, looking at the prevalence and the ability to live outdoors. I'm not to say a pest will not leave a glasshouse and go outside in warm weather. It will go out to weeds. It will do that. And if there's movement, it will be from glasshouse to glasshouse. But this is recurring incursions all the time, not a resident population. At least that's our position. So I have produced, supplied here a couple of maps from the latest papers. This is a map looking at climate suitability and outdoor records across the world. And if we zoom into Northern Europe, you'll see that there are no reports in the wider environment of Bemisia tabaci outside of southern France. Nowhere in Northern Europe is anyone recording this pest. The UK is no different to Germany, Holland, or whatever. So that's our position. It's not present in the wider environment. Another question that's come up before this meeting was biotyping. And again, I've thrown up a few slides here supplied to me by our consultants and latest papers. And this is a slide that gives what we believe from research are the current populations in relevant countries around around Europe, within glasshouses or the wider environment of some other countries. But have we undertaken biotyping in the UK of stuff that we've received? We've done no work on this since 2012, and I've produced the results there. There does seem to be a shift in populations. I don't know whether it's shifted again. We are looking at biotyping work, but again, COVID has influenced this. Our laboratories are working under quite constrained, like everybody else, working under constrained working environments because of the social isolation and the rest of it. And that hasn't been progressed yet. So, but we are informed by the laboratory that it is possible. So we will look to bring it in as and when we can. So that takes me on to inspection and monitoring. And perhaps I think I wanted to consider what is the purpose of surveillance. This cuttings coming into the country and even finished parts coming in are already regulated. They should be coming from either subject to official growing season inspections and official inspections on movement. Cuttings coming into this country must be from either pest-free areas, pest-free pest reduction, which have had inspections every 3 weeks, or pest reduction that have receiving appropriate treatments, that is inspections 3 weeks prior to movement. They should be coming in clean. So our surveillance is really a check on the system working, not designed to be individual consignment inspections of everything coming into the country. If we do find a problem, that's evidence to us the system's not working, and we'll try and contain and eradicate the problem. But that isn't the purpose of our surveillance. We'll just put you on the front line, unfortunately, because if cuttings are coming in, it will be down to you to inspect as best you can. And there's no substitute for intense inspection on arrival, sufficient yellow traps, constant monitoring. You're not on your own. Inspectors will work with you, but we have other constraints, other pressures, other things to look at. So we will do our best. If you can be transparent with your inspector on delivery schedules, they will do their best to get in. They can certainly provide lots of advice on how to inspect, when to inspect, and and the rest of it. So it's constant vigilance. We're going to find it early. Then the eyes and ears have to be those working on site. The inspector coming in once or twice a year or 3 times a year is not really going to find it early enough. We'll only pick it up when the population gets to a sufficient size that our level of inspections will pick it up. I don't plan to go through this next slide, but I was asked, what could you do? And I asked the consultants to come up with some guidance. And this slide, I assume you will access the slides afterwards. Take it away. This was a list of recommendations they gave to me. But certainly there are some precautionary treatments. There are certainly biological control agents that we would recommend. And perhaps the assumption is assume it's there and take preventative measures. So finally, that takes us on to statutory notices. When you receive a statutory notice, it is designed, its focus is all about the outcome. For us, it's about how we got to eradication. How we get to that point is up for discussion. It is for you and inspectors to come up with a suitable treatment program that gets to us to the eradication outcome we are looking for. We still view chemical treatment as important, but we will consider biological control agents. We're not against them, but whether they're effective, will depend on the situation. So this year, we've revised our process to a certain extent. On first diagnosis, our consultants will not provide any recommendations to our inspectors. Our inspectors then will have to follow our standard guidance and come to you and have a consultative discussion, looking at a range of options to come up with a suitable treatment program to achieve eradication. If there are any issues or anything unusual, or you want to try something out, or pose something that we can, all those things pass to our consultants for checking and can be agreed. I will say, though, that we do reserve the powers to be prescriptive in a notice if we feel the situation requires it. But I really want this to be a consultative approach. My final slide was asked questions about why are we not talking more to our counterparts in Europe. And it may come as a surprise to you that there's actually very little communication between official inspection bodies across Europe. Policy teams talk to a certain extent, and as we leave Europe, that is getting less and less. So, what I will say is, though, that I put up there on the slide some mention of what we did do is influence the EU bringing new measures, and these include inspections now of finished plants, which takes us back to the fact that we will carry out quite an extensive inspection of finished plants throughout the year, particularly coming up to Christmas, and we inspect everything that we see on site. We don't differentiate from what country, we inspect what we see in front of us. There are meant to be inspections carried out on finished plants. I can't tell you the level, what's been actually applied, what the European countries are doing. From the findings we're receiving, it's probably not as robust as it should be. But all we could do is turn up the pressure on the EU, and they change legislation to bring in inspections of finished plants. At the end of my presentation, I will go through the questions now.
Derek, I've had 2 or 3 sent to me beforehand, so I'll go through these while we're waiting for people to send in questions. If you do have any questions for Derek, can you type them in and I will read them out to him, please. We've had a question here about identifying what strain the Bemisia is. Has there been any work done in terms of finding out, in terms of incoming Bemisia, what strains there are? Because that's obviously going to impact on the tolerance or resistance to the chemicals applied to control them. Are you able to comment about that, please?
I threw the slide there, which is the findings from 2012. As I said, we haven't done any work since then. We are looking to start it off. As a rule of thumb, I'm led to believe that the Q biotype is considered more resistant than the B biotype to neonics. But the reality is actually all the biotypes have got levels of resistance to a range of chemicals. So I don't know enough to tell you whether the influence of biotypes. We will try and instigate biotyping this year, subject to the laboratory being able to do it for us. But I can't give you more information at the moment.
Okay, thank you. We've another here about yellow traps. How many yellow traps do you recommend? Is it by number of plants or area?
It'll be on area. Can I bet if I send that through to you as some guidance and you can send that out?
Okay, thank you. I've got one here which says the last slide shows conditions applied in both exporting countries and the UK, question mark. I'm not quite sure. I think that's sort of half a question, really.
Well, yeah, there are meant to. I mean, you're those on the line are well aware of the checks that should be carried out on cuttings coming in. What has changed over the last couple of years is that the number of genera that require inspections prior to movement into this country or any country of finished plants has increased. And other countries within Europe are meant to do inspections prior to movement. So poinsettias coming into this country and plus a range of other genera should be being inspected before they come in. That's the point I was trying to get across. If we exported, we would do the same checks, but we don't tend to do much of that.
Okay, and if I make this the final question, because we're getting towards the 20-minute mark, if a grower is controlling Bemisia with biological control-based methods, will plant health consider chemical control in this light, which i.e. recommending this material which doesn't bio?
Yeah, it comes to the word control. We want to eradicate, not control. And I think it's that difference. We will, if it can be eradicated using biocontrol and the program can be put to our consultants and it's been cleared, there's no problem with that in principle. It really comes down to whether it's working and whether it's getting to eradication.
Okay, thank you, Derek. As we reach a 20-minute mark, if I can leave it there for now, and if we can move on to the next presentation from Richard about the control of Bemisia in overseas poinsettia production. So I'll just change presenters and We should have Richard now. Thank you. Do you want to go? Would you like to sort of go full slide screen, Richard, please?
Yeah, will do. No problem. Go here. Okay.
Oh, there you go. Thank you.
So it's fine. So good morning, all. I'm Richard. I'm working for corporate as a consultant. I'm visiting breeders propagators in Ethiopia together with my Ethiopian colleague. I'm also visiting growers in Holland, especially poinsettia growers. So why is IPM for Bemisia management in Africa? In Africa, you have also fewer legal chemicals, so they have to deal with it. And they have also very big list of blacklist of chemicals from retailers, like the Aldi and Lidl, and also from countries from United Kingdom, Germany, and the Netherlands. And we also see that Bemisia is very difficult to control with pesticides. So my conclusion is, and also my findings, is that you must use biological control together with soft chemicals. And we also see that Bemisia builds up very quickly a resistance. So that's why you can use only chemicals 1 to 4 times about that. And it's also important that the breeders and propagators, the production of cuttings, is free from harmful chemicals. So this is how mother plants looks like in Ethiopia. You see the mother plants looking very nice. This is all 100% IPM. You see the plants growing very well, and you see also the greenhouses are very clean. They have a very strict hygiene protocol. And further on the right side, you see my colleague, this is Muse. He's visiting the breeders propagators every 2 weeks. And also he trained the scouters over there. On the left side, you see the lady. She is the IPM program leader from Dume. So, and how do they managing the whitefly in Africa? So what I have already said, they start clean and they stay clean. So they have a very strict hygiene protocol. And also you see on the picture, they remove all the weeds. You don't see any weeds in the greenhouses. And together with the breeders propagators, we make an IPM program. We always check the chemicals which they are using. These are the soft chemicals which I'm talking about. You can check them with our side effects apps. I will show it to you later. Also, the cuttings must be free from harmful residue for customers, so that in Holland or in the UK, you can start easily with your biological treatment. Otherwise, it can be that all your biological treatment getting killed by the residue of chemicals. Also, very important is weekly scouting. So in Africa then, every week they count the yellow sticky traps. And also there's lots of scout people over there, like more than 50 people in 40 hectares of greenhouses. So the scouting is very important. So if something happened, the whitefly pressure is going up, we adjust the IPM program. You can do that by put extra biological treatment like predatory mites or predatory wasp. And this is always in discussion with my colleague in Ethiopia and with corporate from the Netherlands. So, and I've talked about biological control treatments. We have the predatory mites. Just my throat's a little bit dry. Predatory mites. We have the best establishment in the mother plants. So we're using sachet and bottles. The bottles you can sprinkle it a little bit, or you can blow them into the crops. And we use the wasp, like Encartia famosa. Encartia famosa is more for the greenhouse whitefly, and we use Erectomosceras more for the Bemisia. And sometimes they put extra mycotoxin in it, but it's more an extra. It's not really a killer for the whitefly. And we have the soil mites. It's more for controlling the trips, because we see trips is coming a little bit more a problem in Ethiopia, but also in Holland is getting a bigger problem. So here you can see a picture of the natural enemies. The key products in Africa are the anemics. So there's a mix of two wasps, and we have the Swirsky, the predatory mite. And if you see left below, the controlling stage of your wasp is from large stage from L2 to L4, and your controlling stage of whitefly with Swirsky is from X to young larve stage. I will show you a picture later on, then you can see which controlling stage you have with biological treatment. These are the products we are using in Ethiopia with the breeders propagators. So you put your products into your crop. You see on the left side the card with the mix of wasp, especially in the crop, because otherwise you get into the sun, it's getting too hot and the eggs won't come out. So that's why it's in the crop. And also this sachet from Swirsky, you put it in the crop because your humidity in the crop is very good for predatory mites, because you need about around 70% humidity for getting a population of predatory mite. Here is a picture which I'm talking about. So here is the controlling stage for your wasp. That's L2 to L4. And in the beginning with your egg and your L1 large stage, you will control it with your predatory mites. So with biological treatment, you have a controlling stage with your biological treatment from egg till L4. So, and I've also have a picture about the difference between the wasp. You see Encarsia. I talk about Encarsia, it's more for the greenhouse whitefly, and Erectomaceres is more for Bemisia whitefly. The big difference between this wasp is that Erectomaceres has more host feeding. You see that orange, orange, how do you say that? Yeah, that piece of flag is more than Encarsia. So with Erectomaceres, you have more host feeding. So here I have an example of a program of a breeder propagator. It's just an example, but this breeder is 100% IPM, and he uses only soft chemicals, and he didn't have whitefly issues last year. So, and they start, if you can see the program, with week 10 till week 30. And here's the anemics. Hopefully you can see what I'm doing. They start in week 12 with 10 wasps per square meter till the end of the cultivation time. And then we have the Swirsky bottles. You can spray them or blowing them into the crop. They starting in week 12 with 200 per square meter. So that's a lot, but you need it. And also they put in Swirsky sachet, 1 per square meter every 4 weeks, because one sachet is as a lifetime of 4 weeks. And you see the entomite and the antonym are only more for trips controlling. So this is a general program for breeders propagators. And what also what I'm doing in Holland, sometimes we check what kind of chemical residue a breeder propagator has, and sometimes you see strange things. For example, this one, I saw Daces and Karate. I put that into the side effect app of Coppert, and you can see Swirsky. Everything is dying. So you can see also on the right side, 4 is very harmful, more than 75% reduction of your biological or beneficials. And for your wasp, also everything is killed. And what is most important is your persistence is 8 to 12 weeks. So that means if you get the cuttings from this breeder propagator, you can't use beneficials 8 to 12 weeks. So that is very wise to know. And also is something to say, the level of leaf residue is very difficult to say about it. So it's better to look at what kind of chemical type your breeder propagator has been used. And over here you see the pesticide chemical list from Holland. That's only a quick overview. The yellow one are the more soft chemicals, the orange are more a little bit harder, and the red one are hard chemicals. So this is the list where growers can work with, but watch out if you want to use, for example, Actara. It's still legal, but you can see your Swiss key will kill all of them if you use Actara. And even worse, it will kill all your Acacia famosa, your wasp, and you have a persistence of 12 weeks. So then you're out with that beneficial. And if you want to use closure, I think it's very good chemical. It's also a chemical that treat adult whitefly, but is not, I can say, dangerous for your predatory mite because it's a 1, so it's safe. But for your wasp, you must watch out. It has a 4, so you kill almost every wasp what you have introduced in your crop. And if you want to use the tabaci on the right side, it's completely safe. So this was my presentation. Any questions?
Thank you, Richard. We've had one or two. There's one about, would the Swirsky mite also control the thrips sufficiently in poinsettia as well as the whitefly?
Yeah, it also control thrips control. We do it also in Holland. We introduce especially Swirsky for controlling whitefly and for thrips. Okay.
We discussed earlier when we were pulling together the presentation, Richard, about the mobility of Bemisia in the crop and yellow sticky traps. Do you find could you comment about the mobility of Bemisia and the use of traps, whether it adequately shows the population in the crop?
It's a little bit difficult to say, but we think in Holland, not in Africa, but in Holland, we think that Bemisia is more mobile than before. That's what the growers think. But it's not, we don't have really real hard data. So it's only a thought in Holland.
Okay. I've got a comment here. Richard refers to the persistence effect of certain chemicals on leaf surface, stating 8 to 12 weeks. Does it matter previous crops have been sprayed? Does it carry over on benches? And what about new leaves when pinched on poinsettia? Can you apply then if the chemicals are applied in propagation?
Yeah, it depends a little bit on the type of chemical which has been used. So sometimes a chemical still is in the plant. Not all of them. But that's difficult to say, Wayne.
So what if say Dacis was applied on the previous crop and there was also spray deposit on say the bench and matting and that sort of thing? Would that be an issue, do you think?
Not if it's sprayed on a crop before, but if it's in your mats or on your table, it can be a problem. But I don't think it will be a problem, but it can be.
Okay. And I've got one more question here about I missed the persistence of sulfoxaflor. Could we start with this and then introduce biologicals afterwards?
I have to check that one. Can I answer the question later? Maybe email me because that's more specific.
We'll take another one then. What is the security of supply of beneficials in Africa?
Sorry, can you repeat that again?
What is the security of supply of beneficials in Africa? Are you able to regularly get supplies of beneficials to the crops in Africa? I think the question is asking.
So you mean which beneficial we can use in Africa, you mean, or?
No, can you get regular supplies into Africa of the beneficial agents as we do in Europe? Is the supply onto crops regular, and there's not an issue with getting Swirsky and Cassia in Africa?
Oh, that's what you mean. No, that is not a problem because we have a good logistic to go to Ethiopia. Maybe when they work with another company like corporate, yeah, it can be a problem. But we have consistent beneficials to Ethiopia or Kenya or whatever.
Okay. If I can draw it to a close there, Richard, thank you, because we're now starting to eat into Neil's time. So thank you very much for that.
Yes.
If I can now pass over to Neil, hopefully he's waiting in the wings.
Okay, just like to go through a quick outline of what I'm going to go through. So I'm not going to read the slides to you. You can read them quicker than I'm going to read them to you. So that's the gist of what I want to cover this morning. Pesticide residues, as Richard said, they are sprayed. They will have a various range of pesticides on them. It is vitally important to realise that synthetic pyrethroids, such as Decis forte, Hallmark, what Richard calls karate, it's the same product, different name, will have a long residual period on those plants. And we're talking several weeks, if not up to months, of residual properties. That will have a negative effect on the establishment of beneficials. It's also worth considering that some fungicides, such as lunar sensation, are very potent nematicides as well, and may have an effect on nematodes used to control sciarid flies. So again, check with your supplier as to what pesticides have been used on those plants. It is important. Okay, I've never seen pictures of the whitefly before, but it's worth reiterating. You can't see too many of these things. The image on the left-hand side, the large whitefly, Mr. Mouse works. This one is an adult female glasshouse whitefly. The one next to her is the adult male. They are generally much smaller and their wings are more folded over the body because the body itself is smaller. The whitefly on the right-hand side is Bemisia, and it is a female Bemisia. So males again would be slightly smaller with the Bemisia family. Richard said that the whitefly seem to be more mobile. In my experience with Bemisia, it's just the opposite. They seem to be less mobile and more happy to stay in a close proximity to where they came in on. So again, sticky traps, yes, they are very important. They are absolutely essential, but crop monitoring is even more important on poinsettia and a lot of other crops that Bemisia may be on. Okay, to identify the whitefly, we've looked at the adult. It's reasonably easy if you know what you're looking for. The easiest one to look for is the pupal stage, the latest development stage of the whitefly before they hatch out. If you look at the straight sides of the glasshouse whitefly, to my mind, always hungry, that reminds me of a pork pie. If we look at the one on the right-hand side, the Bemisia, that's an empty pupal case. You can see it has no straight sides at all. That, to my mind, is a Cornish pasty. And just to prove a point, there we are, Cornish pasty and pork pie. The other whitefly that we are finding on poinsettia is the honeysuckle whitefly, Aleurodes lonicera. Now, this picture that you see in front of you now is on strawberries. So it's not just honeysuckle, it's not just poinsettia. This particular whitefly is now being found on herbs, on a whole range of weeds and poinsettia. We did have an outbreak on poinsettia a few years ago, and unfortunately the whitefly were taken away for examination by visual examination, and it turned out, or it looked to be, Bemisia. So notice was put on the nursery. You do need to look at the adult whitefly. They have a little grey chevron on the wings. The cabbage whitefly will have 2 grey chevrons on each wing, but the pupal stages will look very much like Bemisia. So again, they're slightly waxier, but they have a very wide host range. So again, keep a very close eye open for that particular whitefly. Right, looking at the controls, we have various parasitoid wasps. The majority and predatory mites, the majority of which are not native to the UK and require a grower license for use. That grower license invariably limits them to glasshouse structures, so polytunnels, outdoor use is inhibited or prohibited. It has to be a glass house for the majority of these beneficial insects and mites. Looking at the insect parasitoids, the Incarcia formosa is by far the best for glasshouse whitefly. Arepmoceras and Arepmoceras eremicus. There is another one called Arepmocericus mundus. We don't have that one in the UK, but we do have eremicus. That is produced on glasshouse whitefly, and it is good against glasshouse whitefly, but it is also the best that we have against the honeysuckle whitefly. And again, reiterating what Richard said in his slides, that bar graph showing the orangey yellow, showing that host feeding is very high with Arepmoceras. That explains a little bit as to why they cost twice as much as Incarcia. They cost twice as much to produce, and it is a much more efficient parasitoid wasp for both whitefly species. It also has a good go at honeysuckle whitefly. So if you have anything other than glasshouse whitefly, consider using Arepmoceras in your control. Arepmoceras lays the egg next to and under the whitefly. This then hatches into and works its way into the larva of the whitefly. They can attack the second, third, and fourth larval instars of the whitefly, and their host feeding, as I said, is very high. So it's a useful predator, a parasitoid for whitefly. Macrolophus, not used directly on poinsettia because they will not establish on poinsettia, but it is a very useful predator against all stages of whitefly, all species of whitefly. They also attack leaf miner and spider mites and other pests, but we have to use them on an alternate host plant. In the case that we're working on today, we're looking at aubergine as an alternate host plant for this particular whitefly predator. Okay, just a closer look at the predatory mites. Richard went through Swirsky in fairly good detail. Just to go through on Montarensis, it's active from 16 centigrade, where Swirsky's is about 18. Montarensis will do the whitefly larval stages, the white ones and the black ones, and attacks the first instar larvae. Now, when whitefly eggs are laid, they are white and a soft skin, and they are easily predated on. As the eggs mature, they go to grey and then black. The skin hardens, or the shell hardens, and it's harder work for the predators to eat into them. Montarensis can attack that black stage of the eggs. We introduce those after pinching. There's little point in putting those predatory mites on before pinching because they're going to take it away and throw it away with the plants. So put them on after pinching, and you should get a much better control of the larval stages of your whitefly. Biopesticides. These are getting more and more important in terms of pest control, particularly on crops like poinsettia, where there could be an insecticide residue, which could upset the beneficials, but unlikely to upset some of the biopesticides. Take a look at the IRAC code numbers. The IRAC is the Insecticide Resistance Action Committee. UNF is an unclassified fungal pathogen. So unclassified means it has an unknown mode of action or uncertain mode of action, but it is derived from a fungal pathogen. The environmental conditions are absolutely essential to make the fungicides, the fungus work. And also bear in mind that these are registered biopesticides, and the full pesticide rules and regulations for handling, holding, application come into force on these particular products. They are regarded as a pesticide. A quick look at some of the conventional pesticides. And again, look at the IRAC code numbers, and you'll see that some have got UNF, UNE, etc., etc. So UNE stands for botanical origin of an unknown or unclassified mode of action. So in the case of Flipper, it's from an extract of olive oils. when they purify, and Tech Bomb is the new product, and that is a derivative of, again, of plant extracts, of plant oils. Okay, getting a bit tighter now on the pesticides. These are conventional pesticides with approval for use on ornamental crops, but notice the limited number of applications that we have on these particular pesticides. Sorry about that. Okay, so we are limited to literally 2, 3, 4 or 5 applications of chemicals. I've not done the whole list of pesticides approved. There are others, and they do have more applications on some chemicals. But just bear in mind that we are limited to number of pesticides and when best to use them. An EAMU, extension of authorized minor use, and the other one at the bottom there, an LTEAU, is the long-term arrangements for extension of use. So I've got the wrong way around. These are at the grower's risk. These are not on the label, therefore there is nothing to say that they are going to work or not going to work. The next slide is not coming up. Okay, so there is an explanatory note which goes on most of the EAMUs, and that says that the efficacy, in other words, they're not going to guarantee the chemical is going to work. They're not going to guarantee that it's safe to the plants. And in respect of that, that the bearer uses the risk is at the user's own risk. Okay, that's important to understand that, seriously important. Okay, I'm just going to take a quick look at the 1 or 2 of the chemicals which are very useful on poinsettias. And applaud buprofezin. It was around several years ago. It went off for about 12 years. It's now back on market. Extremely useful chemical for whitefly control because it kills the larval in the early pupal stages. Please note it has no activity on the adults. Doesn't make them sterile, doesn't kill them, has no activity at all on the adults. Now, sublimation. I think you can read what it says on there. The gist of sublimation is if you consider having a kettle of water and you boil the kettle and you get steam coming out, in an open environment, that steam, that vapor will dissipate, it will disappear. In an enclosed environment, that steam can form condensation on another surface. Think of condensation as the liquid form. Sublimation is exactly the same, but all in dry form. That dry residue will reform on other parts of the canopy. And as I said in the notes there, ideal for plants with a dense canopy. I've used it on poinsettias with very good results and absolutely no crop damage whatsoever. However, be aware that if you apply it to the top of the plants when the bract, you could end up with a grey or milky deposit on the plants. Aim it at the base of the plants and you will get a much better result, and it will vaporize and vapor up through the canopy and kill the larval stages. With this, you're allowed 2 applications of pesticide per crop. So the question comes, when do you apply those 2 chemicals? Do you apply it straight away on the plants that may have already had it in their stock breeding, or do you hold it and put it on later at the life of the crop if you need to? Batavia. I think we're familiar with Movento. Batavia is the new name for it, but it is a new formulation. The formulation of Batavia is now an SC, a soluble concentrate, suspension concentrate, whereas Movento was an OD, an oil dispersible formulation. The actual concentration of active ingredient is different in both products. The damage that we've been seeing on the crops has all come from Movento. The new formulation of Batavia may or may not be as harmful to this range of plants. We also have to consider that Batavia now has a 39-day re-entry period after application. Doesn't mean you can't go in, doesn't mean you have to wear full protective clothing, but you have to wear suitable protective clothing, and that will be trousers, shirt sleeves, etc. Management also have to consider doing a heat stress survey. So make sure you're not going to be overstressed by heat, working in the heat of the day, wearing all those particular clothes. And to cover all backsides at the bottom there, always test pesticides on a few plants before widespread use. Now, with Batavia, Movento, the damage that we were seeing was taking several weeks, if not a month or so, to show. So just be aware that you put the chemical on, you may or may not see any damage for 2 to 3 weeks or sometimes longer with this particular chemical. Whitefly monitoring, absolutely essential before, during, and potentially after the life of that particular crop. If you can, and you know where you're going to be growing your poinsettias, get the sticky traps out now, see what you've got. If you're using roller traps, we found the monofilament tied around the stanchions and fixed with the little black thermal screen pegs is by far the best and most suitable way of putting out roller traps. For the sticky cards, we're now suggesting to use cable ties, and again you can use the black pegs to hold the sticky trap in position if you need to. If it's got a lot of wind in the area and the sticky trap blows away, then use those little black pegs. Have the traps facing south and expose just the one side. The side facing the stanchion can have the papers killed on it. If you do find any whitefly, ring them round with a biro so they don't count them again and again. And absolutely essential, record what you're finding and where you're finding it. If you can work the location of a glass house, bay 1, 2, 3, section A, B, C, whatever you want, so that you know where the whitefly may be, because some whitefly are less mobile than others. One of the questions that we had was how many sticky traps. Roller traps would be particularly usually on every stanchion through the house, every bay. Sticky cards, we go at least 100 traps per hectare. Better still, more you can, if you can do 250 to 500, then so much the better. The other thing on the sticky traps, they are now available in boxes of 1,000 loose sticky traps, which is considerably cheaper than packs of 10s and 25s. They all have the paper on them and they're all perfectly clean and dry. Providing you can store them clean and dry, they'll last an indefinite period of time. And finally on that slide, weeds. Make sure that you keep your weeds in and around the outside of the glass house removed and clean and gone. One of the tricks we've been doing the last few years is banker plants, where we've been using aubergine as a banker plant for predators and a trap plant for the pests. So here you can see a poinsettia crop, you can see the roller traps in situ, the aubergines growing through the crop, and the yellow sticky cards in front of the aubergines. The sticky cards should be between 2 to 5 meters away from the aubergine, ideally on the south side. And again, you can close up, you can see that we're hanging the beneficials on the aubergine itself, the cards. We'd also see that the aubergine is approximately 0.5 meter or so taller than the poinsettia. That acts as a very good green flag for any migrating whitefly and other pests. So what we do, we introduce the predatory mite or predatory bug called Macrolophus. We do that when the first flowers appear. Usually we have a second introduction after 2 to 3 weeks. The aubergine, if anyone's ever grown them, will attract whitefly, thrips, spider mites, etc. So because we know we're likely to get these pests, we hang Ambrosaeus cucumbers sachets on the aubergine, as well as introducing the appropriate parasitoids and predators on those plants. And again, we found that the whitefly will go to the head of the plant. So if you spray just the top of the plant with plant invigorator, it will have minimal effect on beneficials, and you will still keep your whitefly control going. So where we have used them with success, this has been very successful. Okay, these are not hard and fast guidelines. These are my own recommendations. I would always go with the biopesticide in preference to conventional pesticides in the initial stages. And that's mainly because there could well be pesticide residues on the plants. If we go with the conventional pesticides early and we end up with a problem later, we may have already used up the limited number of pesticide applications that we have. So far better, in my opinion, to hold fire and use the pesticides as a get out if we need to. After pinching, we introduce the Ambroseus predatory mites. It could be Swersky, it could be Montarensis. Again, we would go for the Incarcia or Rhetmoceras mix, exactly the same as Richard suggested, and we do that for a minimum of at least 5 to 6 weeks. That would get things established on the plants. And again, depending on whitefly numbers and species found or reported, and this is where you keep in contact with AFA, your AFA inspector, and your IPM specialists, because they would have their fingers on the pulse as to what's going on in the area. Make sure that you keep an eye on what's going on, and if no Bemisia are found or reported, and the only species is likely to be glasshouse, you could change to pure Incarcia. Be aware of the honeysuckle whitefly. If that's found, continue with the Rhetmoceras. To be honest, with poinsettia, it's probably best to stick with the Rhetmoceras because they will do the host feeding far more than Incarcia will. So, if any whitefly are found, no matter what you find, make sure you get them properly identified. Again, work with your AFA inspector. Monitor the whole crop, and particularly any hot spots or varietal preferences. Some of the not so much young, the different colour varieties seem to be more susceptible to whitefly. So the fancy varieties seem to have more whitefly than the ordinary standards. Sticky traps, if you do find whitefly, double, treble the number of sticky traps around the area to prevent their spread. And initiate the remedial action as soon as possible. Discuss with your advisors and consultants at the earliest possible stage. Okay, that was me. Questions, please.
Thank you, Neil. We've had sort of 3 or 4. A couple I'll go through first. You may or may not be able to answer them because they're on spray application, but I shall fire them at you anyway.
Go on.
What is your opinion on applying Botanicard on a trellis with a Wanjet or a ULV applicator rather than a sprayer?
Okay, with the ULV applications, it forms an atomization, it forms a very small droplet, and it tends to settle vertically on the top parts of the plants. There will be underleaf coverage, there's no doubt about that, but with a product like Mycotel, Vertilec, not Vertilec, that's gone, Mycotel, Botanicard, and Naturalis, you are applying the spores. They are a solid spore, and they can settle out quicker than you can with a liquid spray. So preferably, my perspective, I would say for those products, I still go for a high volume wet spray to keep the moisture level high enough in and around the base of the plant.
Okay, thank you. And following on from that, could you use the biopesticides through an NBAR ULV machine?
Yes, you can do later on. And once the plant is big enough and you have a canopy for the chemical to work through or the biopesticide to work through, then yes, you can use those machines. But in the early stages, when the plant is very short and there's not a lot of vertical growth on those plants, I would stick to a high volume wet spray.
Okay. Thoughts on maltodextrin, Radico Majestic in a program?
Yes, very useful. It's one sorry, I should have put in the slide presentation there, Majestic Eradicote. I think you've got 20 applications of those per crop. Useful products. Yeah, they're useful products, but they're purely contact. Again, you must hit the insect on the backside to have any effective kill on those insects.
Okay. A couple of similar ones here. If you use lots of sticky traps or you use roller traps, what is the impact on the sort of flying parasitoids? Is it worth sacrificing a number by using the traps?
Yes. Most of the pest organisms are attracted to the sticky trap by the colour reflected from it, whereas most of the parasitoids and predators are attracted to their prey by the scent of the prey. So they're attracted to different things at the same time. In terms of occasional Encarsia, parasitoids, Ophidius, Macrolophus caught on a sticky trap, yes, if you've worked in a glass house for enough years, you'll get the occasional bird will fly straight into the glass. It just doesn't see it. And that's really what's happening with the sticky traps. They're not going to attract the beneficials to them, but they will trap the occasional one, which is again why I said about the aubergine, have your sticky traps 2 to 5 meters away from the aubergine trap plants.
Okay, and while we're on the subject of attraction, why aubergines? Is there evidence for chemical attraction of whitefly?
It's just from experience. If you've ever grown an aubergine, it's like a magnet for every single pest under the sun.
Okay, and I think I'll make this the last one as we're running over time now, and it's I guess it's the crux of the whole matter. What action can you take with IPM when there are late season whitefly influx events?
That's where we would have the aubergines. If you can have the aubergines growing in amongst the plot of the crop, you saw the slide there of the poinsettia crop with the red bract and the big green aubergines towering above them, the whitefly invariably tend to go for that plant. And if they've come from an ex-tomato nursery, it's a solanaceous crop, it's going back onto another solanaceous host plant.
Okay.
It just seems to work. They just seem to pull them out quite nicely. And providing you got Macrolophus established on the aubergines, and I've seen phenomenal numbers of Macrolophus on those, absolutely zero damage on poinsettias at the same time. It just gobbles them up. It's brilliant.
Okay, thank you, Neil. If I just change back to myself, I've just got one last slide to sort of wrap up. Let's just, hopefully it will. Okay, hopefully you can see that. So just to quickly wrap up the webinar. And we'll go there. Just to quickly wrap up the webinar. Just to thank you for all our speakers. Thank you to Derek, to Richard, and to Neil for giving very informative presentations and for sticking to time. Please don't forget to complete and submit the basis forms as required in the handouts box. If I didn't manage to get round to any of your questions, or if you want to submit further questions to speakers, that's my email address. Please send them direct to me and I will pass them on to the presenters and get back to you in due course. As I've said before, the recording will be made available next week on the AHDB website at that address. And look out for future AHDB horticulture webinars in due course. We have one next week on weed control in ornamental crops. And just to finish, I wish you all a successful 2020 poinsettia season and good luck with your Bemisia control. Thank you.
Thank you, Wayne, for organising this.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.